"Don't touch her." The security guard's voice cracked through the marble lobby, sharp and absolute. But Lena Brooks didn't even look up as she dropped to her knees beside the woman in the silk dress, her hands already moving with a quiet urgency that came from years of watching someone she loved struggle to breathe. The lobby of the Grand Regent Hotel shimmered with crystal chandeliers and polished gold, a place where a room cost more per night than Lena earned in a month, and people like her were trained to move unseen, unheard, and untouched. Yet right now, every eye in that room was locked on her, as if she had crossed an invisible line no one dared to cross. 5 minutes earlier, she had been standing near the service corridor, clutching a tray, her uniform still damp where a guest had spilled a drink down her front and laughed it off, telling her to clean it up and stay out of sight. And she had nodded, swallowing the familiar burn of humiliation, reminding herself that rent was due in 4 days and silence was survival. But now silence wasn't an option, because the woman on the floor, elegant, silver-haired, and suddenly fragile, was gasping in shallow, uneven breaths, her hand trembling against her chest as the crowd stepped back instead of forward, expensive shoes retreating across imported Italian marble, whispers rising but no one acting. Lena leaned closer, her voice low and steady. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" But the woman's eyes fluttered, unfocused, and Lena felt that old memory hit her like a wave. Her mother in a cramped apartment, windows open to the summer heat, struggling for air while neighbors argued through thin walls and no one came to help. "She can't breathe," Lena said, louder now, more to the room than to herself. And that's when a firm hand grabbed her shoulder, pulling her back. The security guard's grip tight with authority. "Step away. You're not authorized." But Lena resisted, planting her weight, her voice cutting through the tension, with a force that surprised even her. "If we wait, she's going to get worse." And for a split second, the room hesitated, caught between protocol and instinct. Somewhere near the entrance, the glass doors slid open with a quiet mechanical whisper. But no one noticed, because all eyes were still on the maid who refused to step back, the one person in the room who wasn't supposed to matter, kneeling beside a woman whose identity had not yet registered with the crowd, but whose life, in that fragile moment, depended entirely on someone they had all just overlooked. And Lena, hands steady despite the pounding of her heart, made a choice she knew could cost her everything. She stayed. The guard's grip tightened, but Lena twisted just enough to break free, her focus locked on the woman's uneven breathing as the noise of the lobby faded into a distant blur, replaced by the steady rhythm she forced into her own voice. Calm, controlled, the same tone she had used years ago in a cramped apartment that smelled of medicine and heat when panic would have made everything worse. "Stay with me," she murmured, adjusting the woman gently, tilting her head slightly as she remembered the small details that mattered, the way airflow changed, the way seconds stretched when someone could not draw a full breath, and around them the crowd shifted uneasily, expensive watches catching the chandelier light as people whispered, unsure whether to intervene or step further back, because helping meant responsibility, and responsibility meant risk. The security guard hesitated now, his authority clashing with uncertainty, and Lena felt it, that brief crack in control, enough for her to continue, her hands steady even as her pulse raced, counting silently, watching for any change, any sign that the woman could stabilize. Somewhere behind her, a voice demanded updates into a radio. Another voice asked if emergency services had been called, but no one knelt beside her, no one replaced her, and that silence pressed heavier than the noise. Lena leaned closer, her words softer now, almost a promise. "You are going to be okay, just breathe with me." Even though she knew it was not that simple, even though she knew how quickly a moment like this could turn, and for a heartbeat she saw her mother again. The same helplessness in the eyes, the same room full of people who did not know what to do. The woman's fingers twitched against the marble floor, a faint response, fragile but real, and Lena held on to it like a lifeline, adjusting her position again despite the tension building around her, despite the fact that she could feel every stare burning into her back. Then the air in the room shifted, subtle but undeniable, conversations cutting off mid-sentence, footsteps slowing, a presence entering that changed the energy without a single word spoken. and Lena did not need to turn to know that. Someone important had arrived, because the silence that followed was not confusion anymore. It was recognition, and as she kept her focus on the woman in front of her, unaware of the storm forming just a few feet behind, the entire room seemed to hold its breath along with her. Alexander Kane did not raise his voice. He did not need to, because the moment his polished shoes stopped just inches from the scene unfolding on the marble floor, the entire lobby seemed to tighten around him, every whisper swallowed, every movement reduced to stillness as if the air itself recognized authority. His gaze dropped first to the woman on the ground, his mother, Evelyn Kane, her usually composed presence now fragile, her breathing uneven, and then it shifted to the one person touching her, a hotel maid in a damp uniform, her hands steady against a situation she had no right to be part of. And in that single glance, something cold and immediate formed in his expression, not panic, not yet, but calculation sharpened by instinct. "What is she doing?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, carrying across the space with quiet force, and the security guard stepped forward quickly, eager to reclaim order. "Sir," she intervened without authorization, "we were about to remove her," and that word, remove, hung in the air like a decision already made. Lena heard it, even without turning, felt the weight of it press against her spine, but she did not stop, her focus locked on Evelyn's breathing, counting again, adjusting again, because stopping now would mean risking everything she had just fought to stabilize. Alexander took one step closer, his presence now directly over them, casting a shadow that seemed to draw a line between power and consequence, and from his angle, all he saw was a stranger holding his mother down on a cold floor, ignoring orders, disrupting control, and in his world, that combination never ended well. "Step away from her," he said, not loud, but final, the kind of command that people obeyed without thinking, the kind that ended conversations, ended resistance, ended possibilities. The security guard reached again, more forceful this time, but Lena's voice cut through. Before he could act, sharper now, urgent. If I move her the wrong way, she could lose what little breath she has. And for the first time, she turned her head just enough to meet Alexander's eyes, not with defiance, not with fear, but with something steadier, something that did not belong to someone in her position. The moment stretched, thin and fragile, the room holding on to it as if waiting for it to break. And then, just as quickly, Evelyn's chest lifted a little deeper than before, a small change, almost invisible, but enough for Lena to feel it beneath her hands, enough to shift the rhythm she had been chasing. "There," Lena whispered, more to herself than anyone else, guiding the breath, steadying it, and Alexander saw it too, the slight change, the faint return of color, the difference between decline and something closer to recovery, and his expression did not soften, not yet, but it paused, caught between assumption and something he could not immediately dismiss. Because the woman he had been ready to remove was now the only one holding the situation together. And for the first time since he entered the room, Alexander Kane did not give an order, he simply watched. The shift was subtle at first, the kind of change most people would miss. But Lena felt it instantly beneath her fingertips, the rhythm of Evelyn's breathing no longer slipping away but struggling, uneven yet present, and she adjusted again with careful precision, her voice lowering into a steady cadence that seemed to anchor the moment. "That is it, stay with me, just like that." And for the first time since she had knelt down, the panic inside her loosened just enough to think beyond the next second. Around them, the silence deepened, no longer chaotic but heavy, expectant, as if the entire lobby had been pulled into a single fragile thread of breath, and Alexander Kane remained standing just a step away, his eyes fixed not on Lena herself, but on the small, undeniable change unfolding in front of him. The security guard hesitated again, caught between the earlier command and the reality now visible to everyone, and no one moved to interrupt her a second time, not when the woman on the floor seemed to be holding on because of it. Lena exhaled slowly, matching the rhythm she was guiding, her movements deliberate, controlled, every instinct focused on stability, not speed, because she knew rushing could undo everything. And she had seen that before, seen how quickly a situation could reverse when someone panicked or interfered without understanding. She is responding, a voice from the crowd whispered, uncertain but hopeful, and that single sentence rippled through the room, changing the energy from fear to something quieter, something almost reverent, as if they were witnessing a moment they did not fully understand but could not look away from. Alexander's gaze narrowed slightly, not in suspicion now, but in assessment, recalculating what he thought he knew, because the narrative he had walked into no longer fit what he was seeing. And for a man who built his world on control, that shift carried weight. Lena barely noticed him anymore, her focus still anchored to Evelyn, but she could feel the presence behind her, the expectation, the scrutiny, and she chose to ignore it, because right now the only thing that mattered was the woman whose breathing was slowly, steadily finding its way back. Seconds passed, stretching longer than they should, until Evelyn's fingers moved again, this time more clearly, curling slightly against the marble, and a faint sound escaped her, not words, but something close enough to life to draw a collective breath from the room. Lena leaned closer, her voice soft but firm. "You are safe, just keep breathing." And as Evelyn's chest rose more evenly than before, the line between crisis and recovery began to take shape. Alexander saw it. Everyone saw it. And yet no one spoke, because in that moment, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The person they had been ready to remove was the only reason this outcome existed at all, and the realization settled into the room with a quiet force that no command could override. The first clear breath changed everything, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that the room seemed to release a tension no one realized they had been holding, and Lena felt it beneath her hands, the steadiness returning in small increments, fragile but real, like something rebuilding itself piece by piece. "That is it," she whispered again, her voice softer now, less urgent, more guiding, as if she were walking Evelyn back from a place no one else in that room could see. And for a moment, the only sound was the slow, measured rhythm of breath against marble. Then Evelyn's eyes fluttered open, not fully, not clearly, but enough to show awareness, enough to signal that she was no longer slipping away. And Lena felt a quiet wave of relief pass through her, not triumph, not pride, just relief that she had not been too late. "You are okay," Lena murmured, adjusting her position slightly to keep Evelyn comfortable. And this time the woman's fingers moved with intention, reaching, weakly but unmistakably until they found Lena's sleeve, holding on. The gesture was small, almost invisible to anyone not watching closely. But Alexander saw it, the connection forming between the woman he trusted more than anyone in the world and the person he had nearly ordered removed just moments ago. And something in his expression shifted, not fully, not openly, but enough to break the rigid certainty he had carried into the scene. "Sir," the security guard said quietly, unsure now, waiting for direction that did not come, because Alexander did not answer, his attention fixed entirely on what was unfolding in front of him. Lena finally looked up again, meeting his gaze for a brief second, her eyes calm but tired, as if the weight of the moment had settled into her all at once, and she spoke carefully, respectfully, but without hesitation. "She needs to stay like this for a minute, no sudden movement." And there was no challenge in her tone, no defiance, just certainty born from experience, the kind that does not need permission to exist. The room waited, every person silently acknowledging that the balance of control had shifted in a way no one expected. And for the first time since stepping into the lobby, Alexander Kane did not issue a command, did not assert dominance. He simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, allowing her to continue. Minutes earlier, Lena had been invisible, dismissed, spoken to as if she did not matter. And now the most powerful man in the room stood still, watching, listening, adjusting to her lead. And that realization settled into the space with a quiet intensity, because nothing had been announced, nothing had been declared, but everyone felt it, the change that had taken place without permission, without ceremony, and without anyone being able to stop it. The tension did not disappear. It shifted, settling into something quieter but far more complex. Because now that the immediate danger had passed, the room began to remember everything that had happened before it, the hesitation, the judgment, the way people had stepped back instead of forward. And Lena felt it too as she slowly eased her hands away just enough to test whether Evelyn could maintain her breathing without guidance. The rhythm held, fragile but consistent, and Lena allowed herself a small breath of her own, her shoulders lowering for the first time since she had dropped to her knees. But she did not stand, not yet, because experience had taught her that moments like this required patience, not relief. "Stay with me," she said again, softer now, watching closely as Evelyn's eyes opened a little wider, awareness returning in layers, confusion first, then recognition, and finally something steadier as her gaze settled on the face closest to hers. For a brief second, Evelyn studied Lena, really studied her, not as staff, not as background, but as the person who had been there when everything else had fallen away, and her grip tightened slightly on Lena's sleeve, a silent acknowledgement that carried more weight than any words. Around them, the hotel staff began to move again, cautiously, uncertain whether to resume their roles or remain still, and the security guard stepped back half a pace, his authority no longer absolute, replaced by a careful awareness that the situation had outgrown protocol. Alexander remained where he was, but his stillness had changed, no longer the poised control of a man ready to act, but the focused attention of someone reassessing everything in real time. And when Lena finally shifted her position and began to rise slowly to her feet, he did not stop her, did not interrupt. He simply watched the transition with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. Lena stood, smoothing her uniform instinctively, aware once again of where she was, of who surrounded her, of the line she had crossed, and for the first time since the moment began, uncertainty flickered across her expression, not about what she had done, but about what would come next. She took a small step back, creating space, her voice steady, but quieter now. She should rest, and someone should check her breathing again in a few minutes. And then she lowered her gaze slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of the hierarchy that had reasserted itself the moment she stood. Evelyn's hand lingered in the air for a second after Lena moved away, as if reluctant to let go of the one constant she had felt in the chaos, and Alexander noticed that too. Every detail, every shift, every unspoken connection, and something in his expression hardened, not with anger, but with realization, because the truth was no longer unfolding. It had already arrived, and it was standing right in front of him, wearing a uniform no one in that room had respected just minutes ago. The shift in the room did not go unnoticed, not by the guests who had stepped back, not by the staff who suddenly found themselves unsure where to stand, and certainly not by Alexander Kane, whose eyes remained fixed on Lena, as if recalibrating every assumption he had made the moment he walked in. For a man who built his world on control and precision, uncertainty was not something he allowed to linger, yet here it was, standing in front of him in the form of a woman who had done exactly what no one else had, and done it without permission. "What is your name?" he asked finally, his voice low but unmistakably directed at her, and the question alone carried weight, because it acknowledged her presence in a way no one in that room had before. Lena hesitated for the briefest second, not out of fear, but because she understood what it meant to be seen in a place where invisibility had always been her protection. Then she answered quietly, "Lena Brooks." "Sir," her tone respectful but steady, her gaze lifting just enough to meet his without challenge. Alexander studied her for a moment longer, taking in the details others had overlooked, the damp fabric of her uniform, the faint crease of exhaustion beneath her eyes, the composure that had not cracked even under pressure, and something about that composure did not fit the role she had been assigned in this room. Behind him, a hotel manager rushed forward, his voice tight with nervous urgency. "Mr. Kane, we deeply apologize for the disruption. She acted outside protocol. We will handle." But Alexander raised a single hand, cutting him off without looking, and the silence that followed was immediate and absolute. "No," he said simply, and that one word shifted the weight of the entire situation, because it was no longer about correcting a mistake, it was about recognizing one. Lena stood still, unsure whether she was being protected or judged, because in her experience, moments like this rarely ended without consequence. And yet nothing in Alexander's expression suggested anger anymore. Only a controlled intensity that was harder to read. Evelyn stirred again behind them, her voice faint but clear enough to carry. "Alexander." And for the first time since entering the lobby, his attention broke, turning instantly toward her, the shift almost imperceptible but undeniable, the hardened edge in his demeanor softening by a fraction. He stepped closer, lowering himself slightly, as if to bridge the distance between power and concern. "I am here," he said, quieter now, and Evelyn's eyes moved past him, searching until they found Lena again, and when they did, something in her expression changed, recognition settling into place. "She helped me," Evelyn said softly, her voice still fragile but certain, and those 3 words landed with more force than any command given that day. The room absorbed it, every person present feeling the quiet correction of everything they had assumed, and Alexander did not respond immediately, because there was nothing left to question, only something left to decide. And as he straightened, his gaze returning to Lena, the silence stretched, heavy and expectant, as if the next moment would define far more than what had just happened. The words lingered in the air long after Evelyn spoke them, simple and fragile, yet carrying a certainty that no one in that room could challenge, and for a moment, no one moved. As if even the chandeliers above had dimmed to listen, Alexander stood still, his gaze fixed on Lena, not with the cold calculation from before, but with something far more deliberate, something that weighed not just what she had done, but what it meant. And the silence that followed was not empty, it was filled with realization settling into every corner of the room. The manager shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence gone, replaced by a quiet panic that he tried to mask as professionalism. "Sir, we will make sure she is compensated and—" But Alexander turned his head slightly, just enough for the man to stop speaking mid-sentence, the unspoken message clearer than any words. "Compensated," Alexander repeated, not as a question, but as if testing the weight of the word itself, and then he looked back at Lena, his voice steady, controlled, but no longer distant. "Is that what you think this was?" And the question was not directed at the manager anymore. It was directed at the room, at the system that had allowed everyone to stand still while one person acted. Lena felt the shift immediately, the attention no longer passing over her, but settling on her fully. And for the first time since she stood up, uncertainty returned, not about what she had done, but about what was being asked of her now. Because moments like this were unfamiliar, unpredictable, she chose her words carefully, her voice quiet, but grounded. "I just did what needed to be done, and there was no performance in it, no attempt to impress, only truth." And that truth seemed to land harder than anything else that had been said. Alexander held her gaze for a second longer, and then something changed, not dramatically, not visibly to everyone, but enough that the tension in the room shifted again, this time towards something inevitable, behind him. Evelyn moved slightly, her breathing steadier now, her presence returning in small but certain ways, and her eyes remained on Lena, as if she were still anchoring herself to the person who had been there when nothing else mattered. "She should not be standing over there," Evelyn said softly, her voice still weak but clear enough, and that sentence broke whatever distance had been re-established, because it was not a request, it was recognition. Alexander did not hesitate this time, not like before, not like when he first walked in, because now the situation was no longer unclear, and as he stepped aside slightly, creating space where there had been none, the entire room understood without being told that something had just shifted in a way that could not be undone, that the line between invisible and seen had been crossed, and there was no going back. The space Alexander created was small, just a single step back, but in a room like this, it felt like a door opening where none had existed before, and every person present understood the weight of that movement, even if no one dared to comment on it. Lena hesitated for a fraction of a second, her instincts pulling her in 2 directions at once, one telling her to step forward as requested, the other reminding her of every unspoken rule she had learned about staying in her place, about not crossing lines that were never meant to be crossed. And yet Evelyn's eyes remained on her, steady now, clearer than before, waiting, slowly, carefully. Lena moved closer again, not with urgency this time, but with quiet respect, lowering herself just enough to meet Evelyn at eye level without overstepping, her presence calm, grounding, the same way it had been when everything else had fallen apart. "How are you feeling?" Lena asked softly, her voice gentle but assured, and Evelyn's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. but something close, something grateful. Better, because of you. She replied, each word measured but certain, and the simplicity of that exchange seemed to echo louder than anything else that had happened. Around them, the staff stood frozen in a new kind of uncertainty, no longer questioning Lena's actions, but unsure how to respond to what those actions had become, because the hierarchy they understood had just been rewritten in front of them without warning. The manager shifted again, his discomfort growing more visible, his earlier authority replaced by a careful silence, as if any attempt to regain control now would only expose how quickly it had been lost. Alexander watched all of it, every glance, every hesitation, every subtle shift in posture, and for a man who rarely missed details, the pattern was clear. The room had changed its alignment, not because of a command, but because of a single act that no one else had chosen to make. Lena adjusted her stance slightly, making sure Evelyn remained comfortable, her attention still focused where it mattered most, even as she felt the weight of the moment pressing in from all sides. And for a brief second, she allowed herself to exhale, not fully, but enough to release the tension she had been carrying since the beginning. You should have someone stay with her, Lena said quietly, her tone returning to something more neutral now, more aligned with the role she was expected to hold, as if she were gently stepping back into the boundaries that had defined her before, and yet nothing about this moment fit those boundaries anymore. Evelyn's hand moved again, this time reaching with more strength, finding Lena's wrist and holding it lightly, not as a necessity, but as a choice, and that choice did not go unnoticed, not by Alexander, not by anyone in the room, because it said something no words needed to explain, that in the middle of wealth, power, and protocol, the person she trusted most was the one they had nearly dismissed, and as that realization settled deeper, the silence returned, heavier than before, carrying with it the sense that whatever happened next would not simply restore order, it would redefine it. The moment stretched longer than anyone expected, held together by something fragile yet undeniable, as Evelyn's fingers rested lightly around Lena's wrist, a quiet connection that no one in the room could ignore. And for Alexander Kane, it was not just the gesture itself, it was what it represented, a shift in trust that had happened without his permission, without his control, and yet could not be undone. He stepped closer, not abruptly, but with a measured pace that carried both authority and something more restrained, something that had not been there before. And when he spoke again, his voice was different, still low, still controlled, but no longer edged with assumption. "Are you able to sit up?" he asked his mother, his attention fully on her now, yet his awareness of Lena never leaving. Evelyn nodded slightly, her strength returning in small increments, and Lena instinctively moved to assist, careful, steady, guiding rather than forcing, ensuring the movement was gradual, supported, and in that quiet coordination between them, there was no confusion about roles, no hesitation about who understood what needed to be done. Alexander watched it closely, the precision, the calm, the absence of panic, and it told him more than any explanation could, because this was not luck, it was knowledge, experience, something earned long before this moment. Once Evelyn was seated comfortably, supported by a nearby chair that staff quickly brought forward, the room seemed to exhale again, the crisis now clearly behind them. But the silence did not break, because what remained was not relief, it was expectation. The manager cleared his throat, attempting once more to regain footing. "Sir, we can escort Mrs. Kane to a private suite and ensure medical staff is." But Alexander did not look at him, did not acknowledge the suggestion. His gaze still fixed on Lena as if the answer he needed had not yet been fully spoken. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, the question direct, not accusatory, but searching, and Lena paused for a moment, the memory surfacing. Without effort, her voice quieter now, more personal. "My mother. She used to have breathing issues. I had to learn." And there was no embellishment, no attempt to impress, just a simple truth that carried years of quiet responsibility behind it. Something in Alexander's expression shifted again, not visibly to most, but enough that the distance between them felt different, less defined by status, more by recognition. And for a brief moment, the man who commanded entire rooms seemed to be listening, truly listening, to someone no one else had thought to ask. Evelyn reached out again, this time not for support, but to gently rest her hand over Lena's, her voice soft but steady. "You did not hesitate." And Lena met her gaze, offering a small, almost shy acknowledgement. Someone had to. And that sentence settled into the room like a quiet verdict. Alexander straightened slightly, the weight of the moment gathering into something decisive. And though he had not yet spoken, every person in that lobby could feel it. The sense that whatever came next would not be routine, would not be polite, would not simply move on from what had happened. Because this was no longer just about what Lena had done. It was about what everyone else had failed to do. And Alexander Kane was not a man who ignored that kind of truth. The silence that followed Lena's words did not feel empty. It felt heavy, as if the truth she had spoken had settled into the room and refused to move. And Alexander Kane stood at the center of it, his posture unchanged, but something deeper shifting beneath the surface, something that no one in that lobby could quite name, but everyone could feel. He turned slowly, not toward Lena this time, but toward the manager who had spoken earlier, the man who had been so quick to apologize, to dismiss, to contain what he did not understand. And when Alexander looked at him, the difference was immediate, the air tightening as if the room itself braced for what would come next. "You said she acted outside protocol," Alexander said, his voice calm, measured, but carrying a quiet weight that made every word land harder than it should. And the manager straightened, instinctively, trying to recover his composure. "Yes, sir. Our staff is trained to follow strict guidelines, especially when it comes to high-profile guests. We have procedures in place to ensure." But he stopped mid-sentence, because Alexander did not interrupt him, did not raise his voice. He simply looked at him. "And that was enough?" "And your procedures," Alexander continued, just as calm. "Instruct your staff to do what exactly, when someone cannot breathe." And the question was simple, but it cut through every excuse the man had prepared, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. The manager opened his mouth, then closed it again, his confidence unraveling in front of everyone. Because there was no answer that would justify what had happened, no policy that could explain why an entire room had stood still while one person acted. Alexander did not wait for a response, because he had already seen enough, already understood more than what was being said, and he turned back toward Lena, his attention returning to the one constant in the entire situation. For a brief moment, the room seemed to disappear again, leaving only the three of them in focus. Evelyn seated, steady now, Lena standing beside her, composed despite everything, and Alexander between them, the weight of decision settling into place. "You stayed," he said quietly, not as a question, not even as a statement, but as something closer to recognition. And Lena nodded once, a small, almost instinctive motion. Because there was nothing else to add, nothing else to explain. The room waited again, every person aware that this was no longer about what had happened, but about what would follow. And Alexander did not rush it, did not fill the silence, because he understood something they did not, that moments like this were not resolved with noise, they were defined by what came after it. And as he straightened, his expression settling into something firm, something final, it became clear that whatever he was about to do would not simply close this moment, it would mark it. Alexander did not raise his voice, he did not need to, because the weight of his decision settled into the room before he even spoke. And when he finally did, every person present felt it as something final, something that would not be reconsidered. "You failed," he said calmly, looking directly at the manager, and the simplicity of the statement carried more force than any accusation, because it was not emotional, it was factual, undeniable, and the man's face drained of what little composure he had left. "You trained people to stand still when action was needed, to protect appearances instead of people," Alexander continued, his tone steady, controlled, but sharper now, each word precise, cutting through the polished surface of the lobby and exposing what lay beneath it. And no one interrupted, no one dared, because the truth of it was visible to everyone who had been there. The manager tried to respond, his voice tight, uncertain. "Sir, we followed standard procedure, But Alexander lifted his hand slightly again, and the words stopped, unfinished, because excuses no longer held value in a moment like this. "Effective immediately, you are no longer responsible for anything in this building," Alexander said, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a clarity that left no room for interpretation, and the silence that followed was absolute. The kind that settles after something irreversible has been spoken. The manager stood frozen, unable to process the shift that had just occurred, because moments earlier he had been in control of the space, and now he was being removed from it entirely. Not for what he did, but for what he failed to do. Alexander did not look at him again, because the decision was already complete, already moving beyond him, and instead, he turned back toward Lena, his attention returning to the person who had changed everything without trying to. Lena stood still, her posture composed, but her expression uncertain now, not from fear, but from the weight of what was unfolding around her. Because none of this was what she expected when she stepped forward, none of this was part of her world. You said you did what needed to be done, Alexander said, his voice quieter again, but no less firm, and Lena nodded once, unsure what else to say, because there was nothing to add, nothing to defend. Alexander studied her for a moment longer, then spoke again, this time not to correct, not to question, but to decide. Then from this moment on, you will not be standing on the sidelines while others decide what matters. And the meaning of those words settled slowly, heavily, not just for Lena, but for everyone listening, because it was not just a statement, it was a shift in position, in value, in place. Evelyn watched quietly, her eyes moving between them, understanding more than anyone else in that room what had just been given and why. And Lena felt it too. Not fully, not yet, but enough to know that the line she had crossed earlier had not been erased, it had been redrawn, and nothing about where she stood now was the same as before. No one spoke after that, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that mattered had already been made clear, and the silence that followed was no longer tense or uncertain. It was settled, heavy with the understanding that something irreversible had just taken place. Lena stood where she was, her hands still, her posture composed, but inside, the shift had not fully landed yet. Because people like her did not move through spaces like this expecting recognition, let alone transformation. And yet here she was, no longer invisible, no longer dismissed, standing in a place that had not been meant for her, but now could not be taken back. Evelyn adjusted slightly in her chair, her strength continuing to return in quiet increments, and she reached for Lena's hand once more, this time with intention, her grip firmer, her voice soft but steady. You did not just help me, she said, her eyes meeting Lena's with a clarity that had been absent before. You reminded everyone here what matters. And those words settled deeper than any command Alexander had given, because they carried something different, something rooted not in power, but in truth. Lena's expression shifted, just slightly, not toward pride, but toward something quieter, something almost uncertain, as if she had never considered that what came naturally to her could hold that kind of weight in a room like this. Alexander watched the exchange without interruption, his presence still commanding, but no longer distant. And when he finally stepped forward again, it was not to reclaim control, but to acknowledge it had changed. You will not return to what you were doing before, he said, his voice calm, but carrying a certainty that made it clear this was not an offer, not a suggestion, but a decision already made. And Lena looked at him, truly looked this time, searching for something in his expression, some indication of what that meant, but found only clarity, the kind that does not need explanation. Around them, the staff remained still, witnessing a moment none of them had been trained to handle, because there was no procedure for this, no guideline for what happens when the person you overlooked becomes the one you cannot ignore. The chandeliers above cast a warm light across the marble floor, the same floor where minutes earlier Lena had knelt alone while others stepped back, and now that same space held a different meaning, marked not by status or wealth, but by a single choice made without hesitation. Lena exhaled slowly, the weight of everything finally settling into her, and though she did not speak,